I think I got everything set up there. Everyone can see the PowerPoint presentation. Is that correct? Yep. Okay, I got some thumbs up. That's great. So yeah, thanks very much. And AJ, appreciated that intro too. I was smiling, even though I took my camera off a few times with some of the things that you said, because it's the state of the world, and project managers are a big heart of trying to keep everything pumping and moving. So coming from a former project manager myself, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. So just a couple of things as we jump into a topic that might be rather timely based on that introduction. I don't think we planned that on purpose. I just think that that's the way that this is going. We're going to be talking about transformational change today. So two things, my contact information is on Attendify, everyone's is. And there was a little bit of pre-work that some of you may have had a chance to do already. I just put in the chat window a link to your personal values assessment. If you want to do this like while I'm chatting, that's fine, or you can do it afterwards too. But it's a complimentary assessment so that you can get a feel for where you're at in one of the tools that we're going to discuss today. I'm also happy to chat with you about that too. Sometimes the results can be really enlightening. So feel free to reach out to me through the contact information. And then finally, they mentioned this already, but I'll be in the speaker room at lunchtime from 12 to 1 Central Standard Time to deepen the learning for you. So let's go ahead and jump in. So how are we going to play today in this new world? Stacy mentioned a lot of it already. So of course, seeing and hearing, you won't necessarily be able to speak. Only the speakers have the video that's showing. So the main thing that's really helpful for us to show that, yeah, there are other people out there, and we have thoughts and comments and questions and reactions to things, is to use the chat window. So please use the chat window liberally. Just remember, it's not anonymous. I can see that it's your name when you write something there. And so for some of you, that may feel totally appropriate and safe. And for some of you, maybe, you may not want to share things in that level of detail. It's also easier for you to specifically be on your computers instead of on your phone. So if you're on your phone right now, if you have a way to go ahead and log in on your computer, that might be easier for you to pay attention to what's happening on the screen, as well as type in some chat comments. And I am going to be asking you to use your phone. At the end of the presentation, I want to share a tool with you that's also free and super easy in the weirdest year ever, where we are absolutely maximizing how we're connecting with each other virtually. So we're going to use something called a Menti poll, MENTI, at the very end of it today. And so you'll need your phones handy for that. When you see the little star pop up, that's when I'm going to encourage you specifically to use the chat window or some other means to interact with each other. And then last but not least, for crying out loud, have fun. That's what today is all about. TGIF, we made it. We're in the fourth quarter of this year. Somebody said to me yesterday, boy, hindsight's 2020, and that's going to take on a whole new meaning in about 3 months. Thank God. So if something makes you giggle, please type it into the chat window. LOL. Like I said, use that chat window liberally. That's how we're actually interacting with each other in this new conference world that we're living in. Okay, so the first opportunity for you to also type some things into the chat window is consider 5 years from now, it's 2025. How will you look back on 2020 and describe your experience 5 years from now? How will you look back on 2020 and describe your experience? What might you say about that? I've heard all different kinds of things. Of course, new normal is kind of the thing that pops up a lot. I've heard the year we forgot, the year we put on hold. Another company that I work with, they called it the Great Pause. Thought that was kind of interesting. Another gentleman, he referred to it as panic porn, which I thought was funny. And then again, back to like hindsight. Worst year ever, Amanda. Thank you. I know, weirdest year ever for sure. But yeah, so as you think about that, it allows us to put ourselves into the future, because there's certainly been some tough parts about this year. Maybe it's funny, but maybe it's been sad too. Most of us at this point know somebody that's gotten sick or maybe has even passed away, let alone all the other layers of just just fundamental change that has happened. Challenging to say the least, for sure, Scott. Thanks. Maybe it's made you kind of angry, that's okay too. Maybe it's provided you clarity. I'll be honest, like at the end of 2019, I was so excited. I love running my own business. And I was thinking like 2020, it's going to be my clarity campaign, like that's fun. That's fancy. 2020 is going to be my clarity campaign, and clarity I have received. And maybe some of you feel that way too. Like maybe I didn't even ask for it, but I've gotten some laser level clarity on here's exactly what's important to me based on, thank God I still have it, or gee, I really need that back when the world opens again. So this year has been a combination of pros and cons, and that's just kind of the way life works, doesn't it? There's pros and cons to everything. So let's dive into just a little bit more detail. So how are you actually doing today? So for some of you, this is a totally normal question. For some of you, maybe more introversion preference is like, I don't know what to say. What do we used to say? We used to walk by each other in the hallways, and you got about 2.5 seconds to muster up your response, before the person passes you in the hallway. And at that point, it's awkward if you're still talking because the other person is trying to keep walking the other way. So maybe our canned response has been fine, pretty good, I'm okay. I remember at NASA at one point, people used to pass each other and say like, I'm surviving, talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Hopefully you're doing better than surviving, but in a judgment-free zone, consider how actually are you doing today? And I'm a recovery engineer, so to put it in quantifiable term, let's just use a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being not good. I am not good today. Maybe I just woke up with a headache. Maybe I'm just overall completely frustrated. 10 being outstanding. I'm doing just fine. So type into the chat window if it feels comfortable for you. How are you actually doing today on a scale of 1 to 10? And this may be the first time that you've even thought about it like this. How much of this, depending on what your answer is, might also be due to the level of change that we've experienced. Boy, politics coming up. We've had some significant issues from a country perspective. We've had these global issues that have happened. It's been a heavy year. So how much of how you're doing is related to some kind of a change, whether that was a good or a bad change, or both, pros and cons to everything. And then, maybe consider how many of you really like change. We're a room full of project managers. Project managers, as AJ said, we're putting fires out. We're moving. We're constantly reacting to things. I remember when I was a project manager, this is going to date myself. That's when we still had beepers. And I remember getting a simultaneous set of beeps. And I didn't even know my pager could do that. But it could. So yeah, being a project manager is intense. You're used to handling a lot of change. And so some of you may say, I really like change. Actually, I'm okay with change. And you know what? I am too. I really like change if I'm the one driving. But if change is forced upon me, it changes it for me. It changes my perspective. And all of a sudden, like, I don't like to be yanked around that much. And so if you ask me if I like change, that's kind of my answer. Is like, I sure do. If I'm the one that's kind of driving it or initiating it, or I at least can tell you I like where we're going. So as project managers, maybe you're here today because you're looking for some CEUs, some continuing education units. Maybe it's just a way to connect because we haven't actually been around each other for a while. Some time to learn and grow, maybe around some of the things that you really care about. There's some great topics that your team has put together for this conference. But what is it that you really care about? Why do you do everything that you're doing? As Simon Sinek says, what's your why? Why are you a project manager? Whether you were one or you are interested in becoming one, or you're currently one now. Is it because you have an innate drive for order, making things better, solving problems, maybe even bringing people together, trying to make the world a better place? I know that was some of my own motivation. And have you gotten the opportunities you wanted to do that lately? Because that might factor into this question of how am I doing? Am I living my life in accordance with my values, the things that really matter to me? Values sometimes being the things that are motivating to me. So let's get a little bit more information about this concept of change. And let's get that information from you. So in the chat window, still, we're having conversations with each other right there. How much change have you seen this year? A few options for your answers might be not much or none. I haven't seen any change. I say that in jest. Same as always, riding the faith fear roller coaster. Or maybe you would say, like, I am drowning in change this year. How much change have you seen? I don't know about you, but I got to a point where I felt like I was drowning in it. Another term that I use sometimes is I feel like I'm spinning my wheels 70 miles an hour. I'm spinning out in the mud, though. I can't tell if I'm even going anywhere because I don't have anything to measure against. This year's gotten kind of cloudy. So for some of you, more than expected, maybe some of it's the same. I haven't seen any none yet. And again, that's kind of expected. So here's another question. Is there a correlation, do you think, to this thing called change, especially when I don't have the steering wheel firmly planted in my hands, and how we're doing? Is there a correlation to how much change you've experienced and how you're doing? What do you think? Yes or no? Is there a correlation between change and ultimately how you're doing or how other people might be doing? The pace of change will never be slower than it is right now, Beth Comstock said, former vice chair of GE, in her book, Imagine It Forward. We do a lot of research on change, and there's a reason for that, and it's because there is a pretty strong correlation to change and how people are reacting to it. I'm also a member of a group called the Association of Talent Development. Maybe some of you have heard about that, or you're a part of it as well. So the Association for Talent Development President Tony Bingham came and gave a presentation to the Houston chapter conference back in 2015. And one of the things that he showed at the very beginning was a picture of a human brain. And using the technology that they had, I can't remember what it was at the time, they could see when the human brain lit up, which part of the human brain lit up, depending on maybe what was happening for the rest of the body. So they unfortunately for this test subject, it exposed the test subject to pain. They did something to the test subject's hand, kind of hit their hand. And they could see which part of the brain flared up. And so you kind of get an indication of like, oh, maybe that's kind of the pain part of the brain. They then also analyzed what did this brain look like using the exact same technique when someone was experiencing significant change. And wouldn't you know, it was the exact same part of the brain that lit up. And so, of course, you could deduce that change is pain. There's a whole lot more that goes into how our brains work, but there is absolutely a direct correlation to change, especially the change that I don't get to control. And let's be honest with ourselves. That's probably 90% of the change that we experience is the change I don't get to control. I've got to react to it. And we don't necessarily like it that much. There's some discomfort associated with it. So one more question. Do you think that more or less change is potentially on the horizon? What do you think is coming? Do you think more or less change is on the horizon? Or maybe it's the same. Maybe it's the same as what it was before. If it's certainly a curve, maybe we're still on that same curve. But there's definitely more and more change. Again, I really liked what AJ said about people are looking to project managers to specifically have systems that are agile. Thank goodness for our IT comrades who created the Agile and Scrum methodologies that we can adopt some of the techniques from for systems that enabled maybe what was organic this whole time anyway, which was periodic bursts of change and then pulling back together to see how it's connecting. Stacy, great comment. Thanks. Rate of change is increasing because of technology. It may be less acute than 2020. Yeah. I think some of us are like, dear God, I'm so tired of hanging on. Okay, so that gives you an idea to sort of settle in on like what's happening for me and what's happening in the world, and how's this change thing really affecting me. I've given quite a few different presentations on just helping people center with themselves in this year where some of us feel like we might be kind of stuck in a fog. So with all this change, certainly probably the biggest change that's happening in organizations is how do we work with each other in this virtual environment? In some cases, how do we work with each other when my revenue just changed so drastically? But certainly, like how do I work with each other when I no longer have the opportunity to walk by you in the hallway for the most part? How do we actually connect with one another? So that goes back to well before 2020. And how do we tend to manage change? We tend to do a change management plan. Maybe we implement a tool. You know, whether you say you're doing this as project managers or not, honestly, like what are you really managing in a project? Of course, I know the triangle. You're managing, you know, time, task, and the cost associated with it, but you're measuring the delta of all of it. That's why it's a triangle. You're measuring change. You're constantly trying to manage change. So we put this excellent change management plan in place, you know, and then we say, yay, verily, it shall be good. I've seen different metrics associated with how many change management efforts are successful. Psychometrics.com said, you know, 26% of change management efforts are successful. I've seen it all the way up to about 50% of change management efforts are successful. So really, are we only batting 50%? We're only getting half of the change management efforts we try to implement are successful. What's going on there? Data from IBM said the need to lead change is growing, but our ability to lead it is actually shrinking. And this data is significant because you've seen this, you've probably experienced it, you may be experiencing it right now. Failed change efforts can destroy morale, waste so many resources, increase turnover and employee burnout, and ultimately crush the bottom line and cause failure in some of our organizations because we didn't manage change well. We have examples of this. So if we know it's coming, why aren't we getting better at it? I mean, we're smart. We know how to anticipate things and be strategic and creative when we're not in constant firefighting mode. So why aren't we ultimately getting better at it? And so I want you to just think about that for a minute. Think about when you've led or maybe were part of a change effort recently that required a group of people to change. Maybe it's this year, maybe it was a previous change, like in previous years. Why do you think so many change efforts are unsuccessful? And some optional responses here. Maybe it was lack of funding. Maybe you would say, well, we just didn't have enough time. I'll be honest, like those are always going to be two issues that come up in anything that we're trying to do. Maybe we didn't have enough time or enough funding. You know, so are those really going to be the answers? Maybe lack of funding, not enough time. Maybe people didn't understand it or they didn't want it in the first place. Maybe we really just didn't have a good process that was developed, or we didn't have a process in place already. And maybe it was lack of alignment with the organization's vision or mission. What do you think? Let me see your answers in the chat window. Why do you think so many change efforts are unsuccessful? What have you seen? Why have change efforts you've been a part of not necessarily been successful? As you consider those, let me tell you about my own story. So Stacy mentioned this already, and I've kind of indicated I'm a recovering engineer. When I finished my bioprocess engineering degree, I got a job working at the NASA Johnson Space Center, and it was my dream job. I thought, oh my God, like I don't want to wake up and go, ugh, I have to go to work today. because I feel like life is too short to do that. We have such a short time on the planet to get to do all these cool things we get to do, and then it's over. So, life's too short to not do things that I didn't really want to do, and NASA just seemed cool. And I remember when I first started, I won't tell you what year it was, but it was a while ago. I had a woman who took me in under her wing. I'm from Kansas originally. She called me her Kansas kid. I called her my Texas mom. And when I first started, she said, Lori, you're going to love it here, but the NASA red tape and politics will drive you crazy. And I remember I still had that ear to ear ground, like, oh my God, I'm at NASA. Like, I'll keep my eye out. Thanks. Really appreciate that. Some of you may be laughing already. So about 10 years in, I did start to notice a shift in what you might say the pros and cons ratio. The pros still outweighed the cons. I still really liked everything that I was doing, but I started to think like, this doesn't make sense what we're doing. Maybe back to that triangle, like, okay, I understand like why maybe the cost is limited here, but is the time really limited like that? I remember working on the Orion vehicle at one point. That hasn't even flown yet. Back in 2000, I won't tell you when, many, many, many years ago, they were like, nope, we have to define exactly how the system is going to work by like next month. And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. It feels like sometimes we're handicapping ourselves. And so the engineer, the good engineer in me, maybe the good project manager and a lot of you said, we can do better. We can make this better. And clearly this is a process broke. This is something that's not working from a process perspective. And so I had learned a little bit about Lean Six Sigma, process improvement when I was working with Lockheed Martin before I became a civil servant. And I loved it. And I thought, that's probably going to be like the secret scroll at the top of the mountain that helps us figure out how to make this better. And so lo and behold, I had an opportunity to implement Lean Six Sigma process improvement at the Johnson Space Center when there were about 15,000 employees there. Some people asked for it, some didn't. You might be giggling a little bit yourself already. But I really did think this is the secret decoder ring. This is the thing that is going to make it all better. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I think underneath all that, on the inside, the human part of me was like, and maybe it'll make me like my job again. Because this level of inefficiency and maybe red tape and bureaucracy that my Texas mom had described was starting to make me actually not like what I was doing anymore. So fast forward about 20 process improvement events later, where we were significantly improving things. And I say significantly because we were getting about 30% of the improvements that we had sought after. I wanted 100%. And so for me, it was almost an even further deflation of, wow, I wanted to fix it and we're only getting 30%. What's wrong? So that was a little breakdown step. It was also enlightening to help me to realize that it's not just the process side of things that affects how well we do it. And many of you probably figured that out a long time ago, but for me, that was a huge aha moment. I'd never really appreciated how much the people side of things changes whether or not we're successful. It was always something that I was like, balance the organized plan and control part, with this like, gee, darn it, something came up, this changed, with what I now consider to be kind of this organic grace of the people things that come up and sometimes stop you when you felt like you were right on the right path. Often are the things that you really needed to focus on in the first place. For some of you, maybe that's a little bit of a whisper, but it's why I started my own business and ultimately left the US government, is to help people see new possibilities within their reach, to help them honor where they are instead of being so desperately focused on where they're trying to go, which may not be the path that was open at the time anyway. To ultimately see what's within this beautiful blue horizon that we have, the thin blue line that keeps us not only alive, but how does it help us thrive in the short time that we have on the planet? So when you think about change leadership, this all comes back into play. It depends on where you are in your organization and your team, but notoriously what I've noticed from working with hundreds of organizations at this point through multiple change efforts is that about 30% of it ends up being the process system tool side of things, KOI, KPIs, ROI. How do a strong system measure it? Which is the part that I thought was all of it. And honestly, about 70% of it has been communication, trust, reward system, how well people actually like each other, values, whether or not we're aligned. So Dana Otto, Senior Manager of Change Management at Zendesk, said it's a common misconception that if you have a change management plan, people will just be happy with it because we have the plan in place. Her goal isn't to get people to like the change, it's to hate it a little bit less, to get the people on board with that. Wouldn't it be nice to know what people were motivated by? So the short answer is yes, this is what every leader wants to know. What are people ultimately motivated by? But let me ask you, do you know what you're motivated by? Do you know what your own motivations are? This is often kind of a tricky subject. And a gentleman named Daniel Pink, actually, some of you may have read this already, wrote a book called Drive. It was his first book. He's written many since then. He's a fabulous growth mindset, insightful. If you just want to get curious about the truth about what really motivates people, he says it's not money. It's money up to the point where you paid people enough to take the issue of money off the table, which I hope many of us are in that situation at this point. So rudimentary tasks are sometimes motivated by the carrot or the stick, but when you talk about the mindset worker, like I have to use my brain, I'm trying to get people to solve complex thought. It's no longer about money. It's about purpose, autonomy, and mastery. So if you get a chance, I highly recommend that book. So how do I know what I'm motivated by? Some of you maybe already had a chance to do the pre-work. There's a complimentary values assessment. I put it in the chat window. Hopefully you can still see it there. But scroll all the way to the top or bottom of the chat window and you can see that or find me, and I'm happy to send you the link again too. But you can take this complimentary personal values assessment to just kind of see like what really is motivating me right now. Another way to think of this is what really is resonating with me right now. When we are able to live our life according to our values, we're living our life with our greatest purpose in what we really, really want. And for some of you, you've never thought about it. That's okay. This is the first time to think about it. And for some of you, you have thought about it. And you realize that this is sort of that like, like this is my transcendent purpose. This is maybe what's between the dash of when I was born and when I may pass away. Like this is the part that mattered. This was the stuff that was important to me. And wouldn't it be nice if we could see this in other people too, what their values were? I digress. We'll get there. So take your personal values assessment. You'll enter your email address. They don't spam you or anything, but they send you the PDF of your results. And your results look a little bit like what I had on the previous slide. But it boils down to not only saying, here's kind of what my values are now that are resonating with me. It also does a second thing. It puts your values into this 7-level hierarchy. So what's the 7-level hierarchy? What's this all about? I love this tool because it does two things at the same time. I still am a data junkie. I still like to see the data, but it takes something that I personally have enjoyed learning about and have seen how I rely on it in my own life, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So how many of you have ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs before? Probably quite a few of you. Abraham Maslow, this was, I think, in the 50s, theorized that we essentially have needs that almost act like a ladder. And I get to the next step of the ladder when I get my needs met at the rung that I was just on. His original hierarchy of needs was a 5-step hierarchy. Physiological needs. How many of you, like sometimes if you have to really go to the bathroom, you're trying so hard to stay focused on the conversation, but there's something that's overwhelming everything else, and it's because you have to go to the bathroom. So that's what he means by physiological needs. If I have my physiological needs met, I'm not starving, I have what I need. Then my second rung up is safety. Am I safe? And this is where this year has had a huge impact on us because safety also includes security and stability. I remember when NASA ended up laying off about a third of the workforce at the Johnson Space Center. We went from about 15,000 to 10,000 over the course of about 5 years. And it was tough to be in the culture at that point. And some of you may be saying like, oh, you should just be happy you have a job. Well, yeah, but how motivating is that? I only got to the second rung on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I am happy I have a job, but I'm pretty sure there's so much more to life than just being happy I have a job. So above safety, you see love and belonging, sort of a sense of like, I fit in here. Sometimes that's related to your family, sometimes that's your team, sometimes that's something you do outside of work. And then the next rung up is self-esteem. I believe in myself. I believe I'm a good person. And then once all of these different steps have been completed, you get to that top triangle, which used to be this tiny little triangle, and it was called self-actualization. Self-actualization was essentially I have my needs met, so how do I give back to the rest of the world? This tiny little triangle. Carl Rogers ultimately added to Abraham Maslow's theory and said it's not self-actualization, it's self-actualizing, in the sense that I go up and down the ladder multiple times throughout the day. Some of you may go down the ladder again at lunchtime so that you can go and get something to eat and take a little break. And then maybe you get back on course with where you really, really wanted to make the biggest difference. So the cool thing about the complementary personal values assessment that you have a chance to take today is that instead of self-actualizing being just this tiny little triangle at the top, Richard Barrett built on Maslow's hierarchy and said, let's invert that and turn that into a whole nother set of layers of what it is that people ultimately want to do with their lives, the difference that they ultimately want to try to make. And so this is where you see essentially 1, 2, 3, and kind of 4 was Maslow's original hierarchy. Sort of some of the steps are switched together a little bit. So you have your physical needs, you have your emotional needs, and then you have sort of your mental needs. By the time I get to that self-actualization, like mentally, I'm ready to like solve some strategic, cool problems in the world. And that goes back to what AJ said about growth mindset. Carol Dweck has a great TED Talk on what's the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So what's above that, Richard Barrett essentially calls spiritual. And even these 4 parts of ourselves, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, is mentioned in a book called The Power of Full Engagement, as these are the 4 different parts of our energy that I'm trying to manage. But the spiritual part, it may be a little confusing. It's not necessarily a religion. For some of you, it might be one and the same, but it's how am I living my life in accordance with my values? In the short time that I have on the planet, how am I contributing my energy back in the way that makes me feel like it's the reason why I'm alive in the first place, is to make this kind of a difference in the world. And hopefully the way that you expend your energy is equally, if not more so, rewarding to you, because that's when you're ultimately sustainable with your energy. So I won't go into too much detail. If some of you take this assessment, you really liked it, please just know, reach out and we can have a follow-on conversation about that too. So here's a little bit more information about each of the different levels. So some example values and where they might pop up. And for some of you, you may think like, oh gosh, that doesn't resonate for me, that word is in that particular level. That's okay too. Sometimes just having the awareness of what hit, what made sense for you and what didn't make sense for you is just part of the journey. It's about understanding and having awareness around where you are and what you believe so that you can do the one thing that we all need to do, which is to just let it sit with us and figure out what's the thing that I need to do next. That's really all we're ever meant to do, is let what's happening in the world resonate with us and then figure out the very next step. That's what our roles are. So essentially survival is kind of down there in financial stability. Organizationally, you might hear this as shareholder value, organizational growth, employee health and safety, relationship, maybe that's some of your employee recognition stuff, loyalty, open communication, customer satisfaction, friendship, that goes back to that love and belonging. 3 gets into those self-esteem needs, high performance systems. If you remember from my story, this is where I was taking a hit. System, process, quality, best practices, pride in performance. We're doing the right thing. We're making smart decisions. 4 ultimately gets up to this transformation step of, I think I've got my own needs met. How do I start to focus now externally? So continual renewal, learning, accountability, adaptability, empowerment, teamwork, goals orientation, personal growth. This is when we really start to focus on how are we motivating people? Because once their rudimentary needs are met, it's all about what's the inspirational thing that you want to do. Inspirational leadership, not authoritative leadership. It kind of depends on where you are. Situational leadership, if any of you remember that class, there's a time when I need to tell people what to do. If there's a fire alarm going off, I don't expect you to ask my opinion. I want you to just tell me where to go. But if you want me to build something new and super cool, I expect you to ask me why it might matter to me. So I won't get into too many of the top levels, but it ultimately just keeps growing from there, building internal community, trying to gain more strategic alliances and partnerships, and then ultimately providing a service to humanity and the planet. You'll have a chance to evaluate that after you take the assessment and get the PDF back yourself. So that's a super, super quick overview and a tool that gives you a whole lot of information. So for many of you, you might find that there are some things that were clarified in just how things have hit with you or not hit with you, what has resonated that maybe weren't before, especially if you take that personal values assessment. It may clear up some things that were a little fuzzy before. For many of you, just the simple fact of having identified your values will be helpful. For others, the additional step of seeing your values sorted into this fashion will be helpful, sort of that macro view. Some of you may not feel like the values selected fit in some of those levels like we talked about, but these are all good steps in helping you to have a closer level of awareness. Awareness is what always precedes action. About the things that really, really motivate you right now. So let me ask you 2 more questions, and you're going to type these into the chat window. So we've talked about this thing called values, and I've used a lot of words interchangeably with that, such as needs, also such as motivations. So just know loosely, like values, needs, and motivations are all kind of the same thing. Do you think that our values change over time? Go ahead and type that into the chat window. Do you think our values change over time? Have your values changed? Go ahead and type that into the chat window. So the short answer for some of you that may still be thinking about this is absolutely, my values change over time. Yes, absolutely. Perfect. So, and sometimes they don't. I may have some core values that always stay the same. I'm often in my coaching work now, I'll be doing work with executive leaders who find that their own values are kind of having a pull and tug with each other, because maybe I always innately have a value around loyalty. But then there's this new value that's popping up that's like, man, whatever's happening in my current organization, like I am valuing freedom and authenticity. And so these 2 are pulling with each other. So do I stay or do I go? And that's normal. That's part of the journey. So our values absolutely change over time. We may have some core values that continue to be the things that really resonate with us. Second question, if my values, maybe theoretically, maybe not, if my values were aligned with the values of the rest of my team, with the values of my organization, what could be possible? Some potential answers: magic, innovation. We thrive together. Success, trust, happiness, resilience, zest. What are some potential things that could be possible if we had a values alignment with our team or with our organization? What do you think might be possible? And I bring this up because I remember when I was debating leaving NASA, and it didn't make sense at all for me to leave NASA. You'll laugh. I actually had somebody say, why would you leave the US government? It's the one place you can get paid to not do anything. Like, they were joking. Oh my God. That's part of the problem. And I went to actually like a transition, aerospace transition center, because so many people were getting laid off. And so, here I am, the civil servant in this transition center class, and they showed me something that was really powerful. It's a triangle again. And the bottom 2 points of the triangle were interests and skills, and it helped me to see that I've got a lot of skills that aren't listed on my resume. I know how to wash clothes. I smell all right today. I don't have an interest in washing clothes for a living. I don't. So that's not an overlap. I did have a bioprocess engineering degree. I got an opportunity to work at NASA on bioprocess engineering to keep the squishy things alive in space. How cool was that? I had a like solid skills and interest overlap. And for many of you, you say like, well, ye shall be happy then, right? That's what our high school counselors said. Go figure out what you like, go get a college degree in it or some kind of training in it, and ye shall be happy. But you know what? A skills and interest overlap is where we survive. If you really want to get to thrive, and this is the part that hit me like a Mack truck, she put the top point of the triangle and she said, this is values. If your values don't overlap with the living, walking, breathing values of the team or the organization that you're working with, you'll never be happy there. And it's like it gave me permission to finally go, oh my God, I'm not bad. They're not bad. It's just that we don't have an overlap anymore. So conversely, wow, what happens when we do? People come to work with blood, sweat, and tears, and they don't even ask how much they're going to get paid for it. That's the kind of stuff that happens. So wouldn't it be nice if we knew what other people were motivated by? So that personal values assessment essentially allows you to measure a team of 9 or 90 or an organization of 900 or even 9,000 and get some of this data. So let me tell you a little bit of information before we start to wrap up today. So here's an organization that I worked with 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, year and a half. And it's a nonprofit organization. It was a national nonprofit organization that essentially did some research and then funneled that to some lobbyists so that they could change laws and policies associated with a particular segment of the market. So that's kind of what this organization did. They were in the education sector. And the team was a primarily younger team. So we're probably talking late Gen Xers or kind of early Gen Yers or millennials that made up the majority of this team. Some of them had been there for quite a while. They had a little bit of attrition. They were spread across the United States, but about half of them were co-located in the same area. So about half of them got to see each other pretty regularly, and the rest were tied in virtually most of the time. So the CEO and their COO contacted me and said, we'd like you to come and do our leadership retreat. Here are a couple of things we really like. I've been working with Brene Brown for a long time. Can you talk about Brene Brown stuff? And as we start talking about what's happening in their organization, I mentioned this cultural transformation tool, this Barrett Values Cultural Transformation tool. And I said, it might be helpful to measure what's happening with the team. And here's why. Because one of the activities I really like to do is something called looking back before we look ahead, so that a team can analyze what's happened. What's the Mount Everest we just climbed before I get too overwhelmed and daunted by the one that's right here? How can I take credit for probably 95% of the things that never got written down as a goal anywhere, but got accomplished anyway, so that I can be more coherent about how I feel about what I want to do, as well as maybe changes of path on what's coming up over the next year. And they said, we don't want to look back. The history has been kind of rough. We don't want to take that time. And I thought, okay, tell me more about that. And so just a little more background on this organization. The CEO was new. She had been there for just a few months. She had taken over. She was loosely associated with this organization through her previous role. And the previous CEO, over the course of the last 2 years, had some things happen in her life where she actually started to get kind of abusive with the team. She would start yelling at them, sometimes like belittling them a little bit. And the team was like, whoa, where's this coming from? We used to work really well together. And then at one point, there was a personal tragedy that had happened in that ex-CEO's life. And so then she's sort of just checked out altogether. So even though she didn't leave until, a little bit before the new CEO started, this was a team that had been in some trauma. So they said, yeah, the Barrett Values Assessment sounds great. Let's do that. So here's an overwhelming chart of too much information. I'm not going to explain everything on it. But as you can tell, it's something that we call the dot plot for a reason. So what you see here is the personal values. So for those of you that have taken your personal values assessment, you'll see this already. Where do the 10 things that I ranked myself show up in these 7 different levels? Essentially. But what's cool when you do this with a team or an organization is you can ask 2 more questions, not just what are your values right now, but what do you believe the values, the current living, walking, breathing values are of your team or your organization today? And then the third question is desired cultural values. What would you like them to be in the future? That's it. And so essentially you're able to have, again, 990, 900, or 9,000 people get a clear measurement. This is the only tool that I've seen that quantitatively measures what your culture is actually asking for. So you can see kind of from a macro perspective, I'm certified in this tool. I don't expect you to see it right away, but you can start to see already that there's some differences between the current culture and the desired culture and what was happening there. So briefly, we share this information and the CEO looks at it and we spend some time kind of really digesting it so everybody understands it. And we come back to the table and we're talking about it. And the CEO says, wow, this is enlightening. This is really helpful. And then she says, but I'm disappointed. Based on the history I just told you, you could literally see the team and the rest of the senior leaders like, oh my God, we didn't even do it right for this CEO, because if you've been in an abusive situation with a manager, there's some shadow effects that stick around for many, many years after you've been in that situation. But she went on to say, I'm disappointed in myself because I don't think I fully appreciated where this team was until I was able to see this information. And I don't know that y'all could have even told me that in a way that would have made sense to me. I saw a team that was extremely talented and skilled and maybe like raring to go. Like, let's implement a bunch of cool stuff. Let's start moving. Let's do all the things that we wanted to do maybe 2 years ago. But another thing that this tool provides is called a values jump. It essentially says, where did the majority of people say we don't have a value that we really, really want one, we really desire, a motivation or a need? These are, again, this is a secret decoder ring. This is your organization telling you this is where we want you to take us. And as you can see here, embracing diversity, accountability, and clarity showed up as 3 significant values jumps. This was only a team of 9 people. So for a jump of 5 means that 5 people didn't have embracing diversity on their current culture. And 5 of them said, and we desperately want it here too. So that was over half of that senior leadership team. So ultimately moving forward, this doesn't give you the 181-step plan of here's exactly what to implement, but it gives you the compass level direction of we've got to step back and make sure that we're understanding what do you need to just put a plan or a process or a system or a tool or communication in place that will help you feel safe again, that will help you feel valued for the member that you are. And that we'll make sure that everybody's being held accountable to the same standards, that we're not walking on eggshells around here, that things are clear. And that might not even take very long. That might not even take a whole year. And then let's fly after that. So that's the value of something like this. So I show you this tool just because personally, it's the one that I geek out about being an engineer, because it is the one that for me gives you the data that so many leaders are looking for, as opposed to guessing what I think my team might need right now, so that we can ultimately be effective with our change leadership strategies. Let's get that number well above 26% of change management initiatives are successful. Let's get that to 75%. Let's get that to 80%. But that means really, truly, solidly addressing what are the people saying they need along the way. And more than that, what do you need along the way? Because it starts with you too. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our time together. I didn't save a whole lot of time for questions, but please find me between 12 to 1 for the break. So here's what I'd like you to do now. We're going to actually capture kind of your individual words that I'm going to actually ask you, instead of commitments, I'm going to ask you, what were your biggest takeaways? What were your biggest takeaways today? So you're going to go on your phones. It's easier to do on your phone so you can still see the thing that we'll create together on your computer screen. On your phones, go to menti.com, menti.com, and let me share my let me share the Chrome window with you so that we can actually see what's being developed here. Stand by just for a second. So I switch my windows. Hopefully this has made a lot of sense to y'all. Hopefully this has made just a bunch of sense. Okay, good. So hopefully you are seeing on your screens. Again, if you went to www.menti.com on your phones, it'll ask you to enter a code. The code is on your screen. Perfect. People are already using it. The code is 4464178. It's at the top of the screen. And we're going to create a Wordle together. After you enter the code, enter some keywords. What are your biggest takeaways? You can enter multiple times. What were your biggest takeaways today? Some of you may be having a little trouble getting there. It may have, yeah. I think that I think Attendify has an update about every minute or so. Ask your team, focus on people, align values, connection, embrace change, shared values are key. Perfect. Know your values, align your values, metrics, change, ask your team. I'll tell you, that's like the number one leadership thing we do, is just changing it from telling to asking and asking good quality questions. Good. Well, I hope as this continues to grow and expand, I hope that this has been a valuable opportunity for you to just maybe think about it a little bit different. Remember, the only thing that we're responsible for is to gain a little bit more awareness so that we have a little bit more knowledge about the one thing that we need to do, which is to just determine what's the next step that I need to take right now. So that is all for me. Looking forward to hearing more from you at the hour. If you want to come to that speaker hour during lunch, or please reach out, find my contact information on Attendify, and I'll look forward to hearing from you then. I'll also share the final product from this Wordle that we're creating with Stacy and the rest of the organizers so that you can see this at the end too. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lori. This has been really great and informative, and I'm really happy with the participation that we got from the attendees. I know that's a tribute to your energy and enthusiasm in the topic as well. So thank you. Yeah, everybody go check Lori out at lunchtime. For now, please go to the poll in the upper right-hand section over by the chat and fill out the poll for Lori's session and AJ's session. We didn't have a separate poll for that. So please fill out the poll, and then you can leave the session and enter into Heather's session, and she's going to talk about the value of appreciation and what it means for your projects. So another focus on people, right? People are the key to good projects. So, all right, I'm not going to close out the session until we've got 2.5 minutes left. So I'm going to give you guys that opportunity to fill out the poll. I also have some giveaways to award. I'll be putting that in the town hall chat. Don't forget to claim your PDUs. The PDU codes are in the program. And let's see. Everybody's still here. That's great. I don't have much to say, but I'm really glad that you guys are here, and I think this is going to be a really great program, and I love the way that Lori kicked it off this morning. So 2 minutes, fill out your polls, hop on over to Heather. She's going to start in about 1.5 minutes. So.
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate the opportunity, Stacy. Have fun today.
Yeah, thanks. Have a great day. All right, guys, I'm jumping out so that I can catch Heather's presentation as well, and we'll see you in a little bit.